In 1979, two psychologists published a paper that would eventually win a Nobel Prize in economics. An unusual outcome for two men who weren't economists at all. Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky had spent years studying how people actually make decisions involving risk, as opposed to how classical economic theory assumed they should. Their paper was called Prospect Theory, and buried inside it was a finding that quietly rewired an entire field. Losses and gains of the exact same size are not treated equally by the human brain. Losing $100 hurts roughly twice as much as gaining $100 feels good. This asymmetry has a name: loss aversion. And once you know it exists, it becomes almost impossible to unsee in ordinary financial behavior. It explains why people hold onto a losing stock far longer than a rational strategy would suggest, waiting for it to get back to even, because selling at a loss means locking in the pain of losing, while holding lets them postpone that pain indefinitely, even while it quietly gets worse. It explains why someone will drive across town to save $10 on a $50 item, but won't bother doing the same for a $10 discount on a $1,000 one. The size of the loss being avoided registers more strongly than the actual dollar amount involved. Kahneman and Tversky demonstrated this with a simple experiment that's been repeated countless times since. Offer someone a coin flip. Heads, they win $150. Tails, they lose $100. Mathematically, this is a fantastic bet. The expected value is strongly positive. Most people turn it down anyway. The potential loss looms larger in the decision than the larger potential gain, even though the numbers say the opposite should be true. For most people, the flip only becomes appealing once the potential win is roughly double the potential loss, which is close to the 2-to-1 ratio the research consistently finds. This single finding explains an enormous amount of financial behavior that otherwise looks irrational on the surface. It's why people check their investment accounts obsessively during a downturn and barely check them at all during a steady climb. The pain of watching a loss is simply more motivating than the pleasure of watching a gain, so attention follows the pain. It's why insurance gets purchased far beyond what pure risk math would justify. The fear of an uninsured loss outweighs the calm calculation of how unlikely that loss actually is. And it's why a market drop of 10% tends to trigger far more panic selling than a market rise of 10% triggers buying. The loss simply weighs more, psychologically, on the exact same scale. Here's where this becomes genuinely useful instead of just an explanation for bad decisions. If losses are felt roughly twice as intensely as equivalent gains, then the goal isn't to somehow feel losses less. That fight rarely works. The goal is to structure decisions so loss aversion works in your favor instead of against it. Automatic investing does exactly this. Money that's moved into an investment account before it's ever spent was never experienced as possessed in the checking account sense. So investing it doesn't register as a loss, the way pulling money out of an already familiar balance would. The behavioral trick isn't overcoming loss aversion. It's simply never letting the money sit somewhere long enough to become something that can be lost in the first place. The same logic explains why people who set an investment on autopilot and genuinely stop checking it tend to outperform people who check constantly and react to every dip. Every glance at a down day is a fresh hit of loss aversion, and every hit increases the odds of an emotional decision, selling at exactly the wrong moment, locking in a loss that would have reversed if simply left alone. Kahneman himself, decades after the original paper, pointed out that the single most damaging habit for an ordinary investor is watching their portfolio too often, precisely because loss aversion punishes attention with anxiety, and anxiety produces exactly the wrong decisions at exactly the wrong times. None of this requires becoming a different kind of person, immune to how loss actually feels. It requires understanding that the feeling is real, well documented, and roughly twice as strong in one direction as the other. And then building a financial life that simply doesn't ask that feeling to make decisions on its behalf. The 1979 paper never promised a way to stop losses from hurting. It just explained with real precision exactly how much they do. And once the size of that asymmetry is visible, it becomes something to design around instead of something to keep losing to.